Chapter 14, Charade. On a stretcher, 2 Russian soldiers trundled me across the ripped-up terrain. My leg hurt terribly, and the wound in my gut burned and made me sick to my stomach. Still, I was alert. I was put onto a horse-drawn cart. Already seated in the thing was an oddball congregation of 4 look-alikes. They gave the appearance of a bunch of mummies. The heads, chests, and arms of all of them were wrapped in gauze bandaging. All had suffered burns of a similar nature, perhaps at the same time and place, and apparently they were from the same unit. They seemed to know each other well and were jabbering away in Russian. They complained of the pain from their burns, but at the same time they seemed rather pleased to be together and also somewhat amused by the similarity of their appearance. I was vaguely curious about what had happened to them, but said nothing. I was in too much pain and too scared to really care. "You have a water bottle," said someone behind me. I didn't realize he was talking to me or remember that there was a canteen attached to the belt of the uniform I was wearing. "You going to drink that?" I felt a tap on the shoulder. I turned, then looked up. Blue eyes were gazing down at me out of round holes in a head mask of white bandage. A white-gloved finger pointed at the canteen. "The flash burns," said a bandage-encircled mouth. "They're making me near dying of thirst." "Take all you'd like," I said in Russian. "Spazibasin," he said, thanking me. The canteen was unhitched from my belt and passed around. Empty, it was returned to me. There were more mumbling thank yous from the group of mummies as an unconscious man with a shrapnel wound to the chest was loaded aboard the cart. "You from the Luga line? The Luga operating group?" asked a mummy across from me. Fear welled up inside me. I didn't know how to answer. I did not even know what the question meant. It's best not to remember anything, I told myself, and say as little as possible. Desperately, I tried to think of the Russian word for amnesia, but ironically, I couldn't remember it, and found myself staring blankly at the odd group. There was puzzlement in their eyes. "What's your name?" the same man asked. "I don't know," I said meekly. A sudden wrenching pain in my gut caused me to grimace. I put my hand to my bandage-capped head. "I'm trying, but I can't." "Poteria pamyati," said the mummy across from me, using the Russian term for amnesia. He nodded in understanding. I don't know who I am," I told him with half-feigned terror. He glanced around at his look-alikes. "Join the group," he said with a pained, raspy laugh. "We're not sure who we are either." I lay in the cart for what seemed like an extremely long time, feeling sick, lightheaded, and as though I was being cooked by a hot morning sun. I remember other wounded men being loaded on and someone telling me I was losing a lot of blood, but I have no recollection of the cart ever moving. My next memory is of being on a bus, which surprised me greatly. The seats had been removed, and instead there were wooden bunks filled with patients. The thing was old and battered and rocked every which way. A nauseating pain clutched at my belly, and I was wet with perspiration. An IV needle was in my arm, a rubber tube connecting it to a bottle of plasma overhead. My abdomen, head, and right knee had been freshly bandaged. My leg was in some kind of splint, and putting my hand to my knee, I found that the spike of shrapnel had been removed. "Why are we going to Kolesk?" A man in a bunk across the way kept muttering in Russian. "I do not live in Kolesk. I want to go to Smolensk." A medic with haggard eyes and wearing a stained white apron gave the man a shot to shut him up. I'm not sure, but I'm fairly certain he gave me one as well. Regardless, when I awoke, I was no longer moving, and I felt very little pain. However, only with great difficulty was I able to open my eyes. It felt like they were glued shut. Blinking, wiping bits of crust from my lashes, I was surprised to find myself in a schoolroom. The wooden walls an ugly green, and many of the windows broken and boarded up. It was afternoon, and the few unbroken windows gleamed orange. I saw maps on the walls, a portable blackboard with a jagged crack down the middle, and books stacked in a corner. But there were no desks. Instead of desks, the place was filled with hospital beds and wounded men and boys. Groggily, I tried to sit up. "Ah, welcome back to the world," said a pleasant voice in Russian. I had been looking to my right. Turning to the left, my eyes met those of a middle-aged man in a bed next to a piek, a coal-burning furnace. The man's head was shaved, his complexion waxy and sallow, and from the waist down his body and both legs were in a cast. Despite his appearance and condition, he had a friendly, almost happy expression on his face. "I think you are going to make it," he said in a joking tone. "Are you going to make it?" I blinked. I looked at the man but said nothing. I was confused, disoriented. Fear gripped me, and I wondered how I had ended up in the strange place. All around me were people, patients, speaking Russian. I closed my eyes. I drifted on the edge of sleep. I dreamed. I began to reawaken. Dreams became memories of real things, awful things. I rolled sideways. "He's coming round," said someone. My eyes were still closed, but I was awake. Thinking I needed time to think. What had happened to me? I tried to make sense of it all. And where was I now? And what should I do? "I'll be back," said a female voice. I was in a Russian hospital of some kind, I knew. I'd fallen into a trap, one of my own making, and I was terrified, worried. A charade. I would now have to become what I appeared to be, just another wounded Russian soldier, one who had trouble remembering much of anything. But how long and how well could I pull it off? I spoke Russian, of course, but how well? Would some trace of an accent, some misuse of idiomatic expression, some flaw in my pattern of speaking give me away? And then, too, there was the fact that I knew very little about Russian life and culture. I only knew what my grandparents had taught me, most of which was about Odessa, their birthplace, and where they had grown up. I would have to be cautious, alert. I would have to listen carefully and learn quickly and well. My life depended on it. Across the room, something fell with a clattering bang. I opened my eyes. "Ah, coming back to the world again, are you?" said the man in the body cast next to me. I took a deep breath. Nervously, I looked around the schoolroom hospital, then at the man, the huge cast on him, making it appear as though he were wearing cement pants. "I am Nikolai Mikhailovich," he told me. Forgetting myself, I almost responded in German, but I caught myself in time. "Здравствуйте." I said hello in Russian, my voice a little more than a dry croak. I desperately wanted a drink of water and looked around hopefully for a nurse or someone who might bring me some. I saw no one in the place but patients. "How do you feel?" Nikolai asked. I worked up a bit of saliva and ran my tongue round inside my parched mouth. "Thirsty," I rasped. "Mnie kolchishka pit." "Someone will be by sooner or later," he told me. "They're very busy. They have so many of us to take care of, and more keep arriving each day." I closed my eyes again and felt greatly relieved. I had said very little, only a few words. Still, I had communicated without seeming to have aroused any suspicion. I took a deep breath. My head ached. I became aware of a feeling of pressure, as though someone were squeezing my skull. I put my hand to my head and found that it was tightly bandaged. I blinked. Then I rolled my eyes upward, trying to see the skull cap of heavy gauze I was wearing. A doctor with wild-looking curly white hair was hurrying past. I raised my hand like a schoolboy trying to get attention. The doctor never even noticed me. He kept right on going. A patient across the room called out to him, but even that did not slow the doctor. He rushed from the room and disappeared down a hallway. "They're very busy, like I said," Nikolai mused. I lay back and again tested my Russian. "I'm so thirsty," I mumbled. "I have water," said a voice behind me. "Take some." Looking over my shoulder, I realized for the first time another bed was right behind mine, and I caught a glimpse of the back of a man's head and a tin cup extended toward me in a bandaged hand. "Spasiba," I said, thanking the man and taking the cup. "Do not drink much," said the man. "You've been gut-shot like me. You drink too much too fast and you'll hurt so bad you wish you were dead." I thanked him again, then took a sip. I wanted to drink the whole thing, but Nikolai took the cup from me and handed it back to the other man. "How long have I been here?" I asked Nikolai. He made a face as he thought back. Like a caterpillar arching its back, a bushy eyebrow went up in thought. 3 days now, I think." 3 days? "They operated on you." Again, the eyebrow went up. "They operated on you the first morning after you got here." "Operated on me?" For a moment I was sure the man was lying or teasing me. How could so much time have passed and so much have been done to me without my knowing it? Feeling under the coarse sheet and then lifting it up, I had more surprises. My right leg was in a cast, my abdomen was tightly bandaged, and coming out of the bandage was a red rubber tube. Leaning over the side of the bed, I found that the tube trailed away down to a jar on the floor. It was partly filled with a pinkish liquid. "What is this thing?" I asked, sickened by the sight of the tube stuck in my belly. "And what's that stuff coming out of me?" The man behind me answered, "I have 2 of them in me. The doctors put tubes in after surgery to drain out any blood or fluid that builds up in your gut. Mine came out in a few days, and then they're going to stitch up the holes in me," I said. "Oh," I said. "You got a through and through. Bullet went in your side and out your back." I lifted up the sheet again and took another look at myself, then lay back. Feeling weak and tired, I closed my eyes. An instant later, a rush of nervous fear hit me. "What's your name, my friend?" The voice was Nikolai's, and his head was turned toward me. I remembered to say what I was supposed to say. "I don't know," I said, my head wrinkling with the real worry and confusion I felt. Zabit vivost, he said, with a laugh, using a Russian word meaning to forget some ordinary, everyday bit of information. He seemed to think I was joking. I explained that my head wound had left me unable to remember anything, that I was suffering from amnesia, poteria pamiati. Then I lay back, feeling suddenly very scared. "I'm crazy," I said. "I don't have any idea who I am." I hoped I sounded as convincing as I did anguished. Nikolai apologized for laughing at me, not once but several times, as though he had committed some great sin. It must be a very troubling feeling not to know who you are." I nodded. "Well, how are you doing?" said a nurse, a pretty blonde girl, her skin so white it looked transparent. She put a hand to my head and, reaching into a pocketed apron, took out a thermometer. "Open your mouth, Alexander." "What?" I blurted. "Ah, so at least we know your name," exclaimed Nikolai. Confused, I looked at the nurse. "Why do you call me Alexander?" Flustered, she studied a clipboard chart at the foot of my bed. "Alexander Dukhanov," she said, her voice whispery soft. "Serial number K487944, 220th Armored Division. That's what your identity papers say." She blushed, bright pink. "Is there some problem?" I just stared. "The boy did not remember his name until now," said Nikolai by way of explanation. "Amnesia," said the man in the bed behind me. "Ah, I see," said the nurse. She smiled faintly at me. "We have had others with poteria pamiati. Usually the memory comes back." She slipped the thermometer under my tongue, then pressed her fingers to my wrist to take my pulse. "Let's hope that yours does too, Alexander." Alexander Dukhanov. That was the name of the dead boy beneath the tank, the boys whose uniform and papers I had taken, and now I was him. "Little by little it will come back to you." Speechless, I stared at her, unable to tell her I already remembered everything, who I was, what had happened to me, and what I had done, both before and after the battle. All the awful details. I wanted to scream, I wanted to yell out the truth, but I couldn't. I was afraid. It was so strange, so twisted. I was caught up in the middle of a lie, pretending to be unable to remember things I wished I could forget.